Before I tell you how my own daughter tried to empty my life using my name, picture this. You are sitting inside a bank's private meeting room, the kind with frosted glass and no windows, and the branch fraud officer slides a folder across the table toward you. Inside are wire transfer records, 6 of them. Your name is on every single one. The amounts total just over $340,000. Your daughter is seated to your left, her husband is to her right, and she looks at you with something that is not guilt and not anger. It is patience. The patience of someone who has already rehearsed this moment 100 times. She taps the top page and says quietly, completely calmly, "Dad, you did this, we have the records." I looked at the account number the money had been wired to. I had never seen it before in my life, and the fraud officer, a woman named Gloria Reyes, had gone very, very still. Before the story gets darker, like this video, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what city you are watching from. Because betrayal does not always come from strangers. Sometimes it sits at your kitchen table, calls you dad, and waits for you to stop breathing. My name is Raymond Aldridge. I am 61 years old. I spent 34 years as a structural engineer, the kind of work where one miscalculation does not just cost money, it costs lives. I calculated everything carefully, every beam, every load, every margin of safety. I brought that same discipline home. I built slowly. My wife Diane and I bought our first house in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1991 with a down payment I had saved for 6 years. We drove used cars. We cooked at home. We said no to things that felt easy, so we could say yes to things that lasted. By the time Diane was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in 2017, we had a paid-off home, a rental property on Birchwood Lane, a retirement account, and $340,000 in a private savings account I called the Quiet Fund. Money I had set aside over 2 decades, $50 at a time for the years after work stopped. Diane passed in the spring of 2019. I have not fully recovered from that, and I do not expect to. She was the one who made me believe that careful people could also be happy. When she died, I had the money, the property, and the house. What I lost was the reason I had built any of it. Family, I believed, was what remained. My daughter Natalie was 34 when Diane died. She had her mother's eyes and, I thought, her mother's character. She grieved hard. She called every Sunday. She brought food during the months I could not cook and sat with me through the silences. I was grateful in a way that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not lost a spouse. Grateful that the person you loved most left behind someone who still shows up. Her husband Marcus had always been quieter around me. Polite, careful with his words in a way I had once mistaken for respect. He worked in commercial real estate and had, I learned later, accumulated a significant amount of personal debt through 2 failed development projects. The first small signal came 14 months after Diane's funeral. Natalie asked gently whether I had ever considered consolidating my accounts. She said she had read that older accounts sometimes had poor interest structures. I said I was fine. She nodded and changed the subject. I noticed the question. I told myself it was love. 3 months after that, Marcus mentioned over dinner that he knew a financial advisor who specialized in estate simplification. I thanked him and said I had my own attorney. He did not press it. But the following week, Natalie asked if she could have the login for my online banking, just to help me, she said, now that things were more complicated. I gave it to her. That was the door I opened. I did not know it then. Over the next 4 months, small things began to disappear. A quarterly statement I was certain I had placed on my desk. The password to my brokerage account, which stopped working without explanation. A folder in my filing cabinet that had contained the deed to the Birchwood rental. Gone, then reappearing a week later in a slightly wrong position. I mentioned the missing statement to Natalie. She looked at me with gentle concern and said, "Dad, you've been under so much stress? It might just be misplaced." I was 61 years old. I had never misplaced a financial document in my adult life. But grief does something to your confidence in your own memory. I had cried in a grocery store parking lot 6 months after Diane died because I could not remember which brand of coffee she preferred. Small certainties had become unreliable. And Natalie knew that. She had watched it happen. I believe now she had filed that knowledge away. The 4th incident was the one that should have stopped everything. I received a text message alert from my bank at 11:42 on a Tuesday night. It said a new external transfer account had been added to my profile. I called the bank the next morning and was told I had added it myself through the online portal. I had not touched my online portal in 3 weeks. I told the customer service representative there must be an error. She said the login credentials matched. I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time. That night I called Natalie. She said it sounded like a glitch. She said she would look into it. She never mentioned it again. The morning everything collapsed, I had gone into my bank branch in person to ask about a paper statement I had never received. Gloria Reyes, the fraud officer, was the one who came to help me. She pulled up my account and went quiet in the way that tells you something is wrong before any words arrive. She asked me to confirm my current address. Then she asked whether I had recently authorized a series of wire transfers. When I said no, she turned the monitor toward me. 6 transfers. The first had gone out 11 weeks earlier, 3 days after Natalie had helped me reset a password she said had been corrupted. The transfers were spaced out, irregular enough to avoid the automatic 30-day review flag, regular enough that the total had accumulated to $340,000 over less than 3 months. The receiving account was registered to a Delaware LLC. I had never heard the name. Gloria asked who had access to my credentials. I said my daughter. She picked up her phone, not to call Natalie, to call their fraud investigation unit. I felt something close. Not anger, not grief. Something older and colder than either. The feeling of watching a proof complete itself. I did not call Natalie that morning. I sat in the bank for 2.5 hours, and I answered every question Gloria and then the fraud investigator, a man named Dennis Howell, asked me. I gave them my attorney's name. I gave them the login history I had noticed. I gave them the date of the password reset. Then I drove home, went to my filing cabinet and photographed every document that remained. I called my estate attorney, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had handled Diane's estate and knew my financial history in precise detail. I told her everything in one unbroken account. She was silent for a moment and then said, "Raymond, do not move anything. Do not change anything. Let the bank's investigators work and call me before you speak to Natalie." I then found an old spare phone I had kept in a drawer since 2020, activated it on a prepaid plan, and saved Patricia's number and Dennis Howell's number as the only 2 contacts. Natalie called me twice that evening. I watched the phone ring and did not answer. I slept better than I had in months. The meeting at the bank 2 days later had been Natalie's idea. She had called the branch manager, introduced herself as my daughter and emergency contact, expressed concern about my recent behavior, and requested a family account review. She arrived with Marcus, who carried a leather portfolio. She hugged me at the door. She believed she was walking into a conversation she controlled. Dennis Howell introduced himself. Gloria sat to his left. Patricia Osei sat to my right. Natalie looked at Patricia, and then at me with the first flicker of something unplanned behind her eyes. Dennis placed the transfer records on the table. He explained the LLC. He explained that the account had been created using a device registered to an IP address at Natalie and Marcus's home address. He explained that the login timestamps showed access from that same IP during hours I was documented elsewhere, specifically during 3 occasions when Natalie herself had driven me to medical appointments and a physical therapy session for my left shoulder. Marcus opened his mouth. Patricia said quietly, "I would advise you not to speak." Natalie looked at me. "Dad, I was trying to protect it. Marcus needed... We were going to put it back." I had prepared one sentence for this moment. I had thought about it for 2 nights. "You watched your mother teach you what love looks like," I said. "And then you used it as a key." The room was completely silent. Then Dennis Howell informed them both that the fraud unit had referred the case to the district attorney's office that morning. The investigation took 4 months. The Delaware LLC was traced to Marcus, who had incorporated it 18 months earlier, 7 months before the first password question, 9 months before Diane's anniversary. It had been planned across seasons. Patricia's parallel civil action froze Marcus and Natalie's joint assets pending restitution. Dennis Howell testified at the criminal hearing. So did Gloria Reyes. So did the IP forensics analyst, who had matched every login to Natalie and Marcus's home network. Patricia stood beside me in the courthouse hallway when the judge read the restitution order. Full recovery of the $340,000 plus investigative costs. Marcus received a felony wire fraud conviction. Natalie, whose attorney argued diminished agency under Marcus's financial pressure, received a lesser charge, restitution requirements, and 3 years of probation. The judge looked at Marcus before sentencing and said, "You built this scheme slowly and deliberately over more than a year. The only thing longer than your planning was the trust you violated to execute it." I wrote that sentence down that evening. My neighbor Carol brought a casserole the week after the sentencing. She set it on my counter and did not ask questions, which was the kindest thing anyone did for me that month. The house was quiet in a new way after that. It had been quiet after Diane. That quiet had been heavy, full of her absence. This quiet was different, emptier. The kind that comes when you realize you had been filling a space with someone who was measuring it. I sat in the kitchen one evening and looked at the chair where Natalie used to sit on Sunday calls. I did not feel rage. I felt the specific, irreplaceable grief of loving someone for 34 years and discovering that love was not, in the end, symmetrical. Carol's casserole was very good. I ate the whole thing over 3 days and left the dish on her porch with a note that said, "Thank you, simply, because some things do not require more words than that. Here is what I know now that I did not know before." Grief is not just the loss of the person who died. Sometimes it is the loss of who you believed survived them. Natalie was not stolen from me by Marcus alone. She had made choices, slow and deliberate, over more than a year. Love does not prevent that. It only makes it harder to see coming. I built carefully my entire life because I understood that structure requires honesty, that a beam carrying more than it was designed to carry does not fail loudly. It fails quietly, over time, in ways no one notices until the floor gives way. My quiet fund is restored. My house is mine. My name is still Raymond Aldridge. What they tried to take was not the money. It was my certainty that I still knew how to read the things that mattered. I read it correctly in the end. That will have to be enough. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and leave your city in the comments. It means more than you know. I will see you in the next one.